Anything you would love our listeners to ponder on after everything we've covered today?
We have not talked about the life review phenomenon, and it's something I always try to touch on in any conversation about consciousness. So the life review is often reported in a near-death experience. And a near-death experience is an instance where a person has a physiological trauma, like cardiac arrest, for example. Their heart stops beating, they're in the hospital, they're clinically dead. And we know from neuroscience and medicine that the brain gets to a level where it should not be capable of producing a complex thought or memory. The person's brain dead. Their brain is either completely off at this point or it's barely functional. And yet the person has elaborate memories. Sometimes they hover over their body. They talk about seeing deceased loved ones, mystical beings, a being of light. They talk about being surrounded with unconditional love, although sometimes it can be a scary process too, which is kind of a different category of near-death experience. But often they're very blissful. And some people would say, well, that's a hallucination, that the brain is spitting out chemicals because you're getting close to death and it's trying to comfort the body. And I would say that that's not the case based on a lot of science, but one of the most convincing is known as the veridical out-of-body experience. Veridical means that what the person sees or hears or experiences while out of his or her body is validated as being accurate when they come back into their body after resuscitation. So if there's a memory that occurs that's accurate during the time of no brain function, that can be time-stamped to that period, we know there is a functional consciousness with a dysfunctional brain. Okay, so Dr. Bruce Greyson from the University of Virginia, who I interviewed for my podcast, he studied this extensively. He said, we're left with this paradox that at a time when the brain isn't functioning, the mind is functioning better than ever. And it's a classic example where you get the brain out of the way and there's an enriched consciousness because the brain's actually restricting. Okay, I give that preface because if we view the near-death experience not as a hallucination, because if we're getting accurate information, a verified perception, that's not a hallucination, it's accurate. Then we need to look very closely at what happens to people in this realm, because they come back into their body and they change their lives around. And sometimes they get divorced, they change their jobs. It's overnight their priorities shift because they had a massive experience. Why is that happening? Is there something we can learn from it? And I would say yes, that we're getting insights into this broader realm that we just don't have access to in a body most of the time because our brain's filtering it out. So the life review is not reported all the time, but it's reported sometimes. And this has been thousands of years, a near-death experience has been reported. People relive their lives in a flash. So all the events in their life, no matter how big or small, they say that they re-experience them where time is altered somehow. And it's like, in a split second, this is happening. It's not only from their own personal perspective, though. It's from also the perspective of the people that they impacted. And I'll give an example from Dannion Brinkley, who I interviewed for my podcast as well. He's had 4 near-death experiences in his life. He was struck by lightning, so electrocuted, open heart surgery twice, brain surgery once. And each time he had a life review that he remembers. And so each time for him, it started at the beginning of his life and went all the way up to the present moment. So he got to see the progress in his life and how, what he was doing before versus now. I mention his case because he was in Vietnam in his younger years, and he told me that he was vicious in combat. Materialistic guy, I guess he wanted to be as vicious as possible, killing people. And so when he went into his life review, he relived the deaths of the people that he killed through their eyes. He became that person. And he also felt the pain of the child that would no longer have a father because he had killed the father. So he felt the indirect effects. And this is the clearest example of interconnectivity, that we are one consciousness at some level that we're not perceiving right now, but at a higher level of reality beyond space and time, we're all the same. We are literally the same consciousness. And something about liberating the consciousness from the body in the near-death experience allows people to perceive that. So when someone like Dannion Brinkley comes back to life and talks about this, I mean, he became a hospice volunteer, number one, but he talks about, just like many other near-death experiencers, it's sort of like getting the answer to the test. What you end up caring about when you see your life review is how you treated people, the joy you brought versus the pain. And it's not always the big things. One of the big themes is the little things in the life review are the big things that you care about. So it's treating the cashier well, because if you don't treat the cashier well, maybe in the life review, you see how that negative interaction you had caused the cashier to be in a worse mood, which impacted every other customer in the line. And you see the rippling effects of it. And those are the things apparently in the life review where people say, I knew better, I should have done better. So if we were to live with that idea, or even the possibility that that's true, and if we consider there to be one mind based on all the science that I think is credible, at least some of it is pointing in this direction, then it's at least possible that this is a real thing. And that probability, that non-zero probability, is enough for us to rethink every interaction throughout the day and the rippling effects. So just this conversation that we're having right now, the fact that you're willing to have a conversation like this and put it out there to the world, who knows who will hear this at any point in history and what that will do for that person. And one last thing before we close up this question. There's a theory called chaos theory, and the butterfly effect is within that. This idea that small changes can have a big effect. And there was a meteorologist who discovered this, where he was doing weather predictions and changed one of his numbers by a tiny decimal point. And he realized he got a drastically different outcome because he changed the decimal point. So he would have said, wow, small change in the initial conditions lead to a massively different outcome. I wouldn't have predicted that. It's a non-linear effect. And our brain likes to think in linearity. Like if I throw a ball, I can see that the force from my arm made the ball go a certain distance. It's very clear how the ball got there. Whereas with a non-linear effect, we can't see the ripples. So the butterfly effect is a butterfly flapping its wings in China can cause a hurricane in New York, mathematically speaking. That's the way the math works. So if we think about that in our own lives, it's a very empowering idea, because it doesn't matter if you're the president of a nation or a cashier at a store or a business owner or anything in the world. Every single person can have an impact through these ripple effects that we can't always see. Yeah. And that's why another reason I'm so passionate about getting these messages out, because all it takes is one person to have a shift who could then shift someone else in some way just by being kinder. And then that, who knows what that does to the world.
It's huge. That's incredible. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but I recently interviewed Peter Panago on my podcast. And yes. he had a near-death experience while ice climbing a wall, and he spoke of everything you just said, everything, and it sat with me for days, because he spoke about it in such vivid detail and everything that going on. And he had 2 near-death experiences, and I was just like, wow, it really makes you think about everything, which is beautiful.